we often feel like we're totally failing at parenting when we have intense kids because everything that we read on blogs, what we see on Instagram, and what everybody in our life is telling us to do, it's just not working. And we try and we try and we try and we fail, and everybody keeps telling us to do the same thing that's not working. So most of the time we feel alone, we feel judged. And we are judged by people because they're looking and they're like, you're not consistent enough or you're not strict enough. But that's not it. It's just they're not suggesting the right thing.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how easy it is for marriage to take a back seat. But unlike your parents' marriage, your marriage can feel good while raising kids and doesn't have to feel hard. It can look like having each other's backs, even flirting and looking forward to spending time with each other. And I'm here to help you. So join me here each week as we dive into what it takes for your marriage to become something you enjoy again, from how to handle conflict better and bringing that spark back into your relationship. If you're ready for your marriage to feel good again, this podcast is for you. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I am really excited to have Anouk here as a guest because we're going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is having emotionally intense kids, having kids with special needs. I've got 2 of them. Also, my toddler is just next level emotional. So I thought it'd be great to have Anouk here share with us her expertise when it comes to supporting parents in this world, in a world where the advice that you hear for quote unquote normal kids doesn't quite fit the bill for you and your household. So welcome, Anouk. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. So before we dive in, let me tell you a little bit about her. So Anouk Godbout is a mom of 3 emotionally intense kids and has a master's in social work and has been supporting parents for 15 years. She supports parents of emotionally intense kids for whom nothing in the general parenting advice seems to work, so they feel confident in trying different things that fit their kids' needs better. Thanks again for being here. Can you share with us where you live and how old your kids are?
I'm in Quebec, Canada, and I'm French Canadian, so that's why I have an accent. And I have 3 kids. My older one is 15, then 13 and 4. I've been basically working with parents since I'm a mom myself.
So what inspired for you to be a mentor for parents with emotionally intense kids?
As a social worker, I was working in a pediatric hospital and readaptation center for a few years, and we moved away from that city, and I decided to work on my own. And I realized at some point, talking to another mom, that I had basically no clue what meant raising normal, as you said, like quote unquote normal kids, because I almost always work with parents of kids with any kind of special needs or medically complex kids, and I only have emotionally intense kids myself. I didn't realize that I was not parenting normal kids. So when I started, I was parenting any family, but what I was sharing didn't resonate with parents of normal kids, but it did resonate with parents of emotionally intense kids. So that's why I pivoted to that. And honestly, the difference for me is really the most important, that we often feel like we're totally failing at parenting when we have those intense kids because everything that we read on blogs, what we see on Instagram, and what everybody in our life is telling us to do, it's just not working. And we try and we try and we try and we fail and we fail and we fail. And everybody keeps telling us to do the same thing that's not working. So most of the time we feel alone, we feel judged. And we are judged by people because they're looking and they're like, you're not consistent enough or you're not strict enough. But that's not it. It's just they're not suggesting the right thing.
Yeah, and it's kind of tricky because when you go out in public and you have emotionally intense kids, and let's say your child is the one that likes to throw themselves on the floor and throw a huge tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
Most times when parents don't have emotionally intense kids and cannot relate to that,
No.
they blame the parent for not being able to control their child.
Yeah.
And it
Really.
feels awful.
Yeah. and everybody's looking at you sideways, and you're not just feeling judged, you're judged. Like people
Oh,
are really
totally.
judging you. It's not just a feeling, it's a fact. Very little parent will really relate to that. You need to have one of those kids and know how difficult it can be to deal with those tantrum, because there's two main profile. There's those kids that will have tantrum anywhere, but there's also kids that will be the perfect little angel everywhere else, then at home. And at
Mhm.
home, it's very hard. Then people that don't know your kids at home just don't get it. Like you're saying that it's hard, but they're like, yeah, but you have the perfect little kids that always comply and always listen and doesn't disturb in the classroom and is doing perfect with the grandparents. But at home, you're getting all of it. So you don't get the judgment as much from other people, but you do get no support and no understanding. So none of those are a great place to to be.
I know. I remember when my two oldest ones are both boys, they would go to class and the teacher would be like, "Oh, they're amazing." And I'm like, um,
Okay.
are we talking about the same person? I mean, they are amazing,
Yeah.
obviously, and
Also.
can be incredibly challenging at home
Yeah.
when upset. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, you don't see that? Like, I was no doubt like very scared for my now first grader to get into first grade because kindergarten's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's mostly play,
Mhm.
it's a slight difference from daycare, and it's fine. But
Mhm.
first grade, it's a longer day. You got to sit longer. It's way more academic. It's really their first year of being in an academic setting
Yeah.
with less play and
Mhm.
more expectations and more just work.
Sit down and don't
Yeah.
move.
And then they're also exposed to older kids. For
Mhm.
our district, at least, all the kindergartners are only with kindergartners. Like during recess and lunch, they're sectioned off in a different part of the school.
Mhm.
Whereas first through fifth grade, they're all in the same area. So you can be exposed to older kids. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to end up in a fight, or, someone's going to say something wrong or look at him the wrong way, and he's going to blow up. And I'm just going to get a call from the school saying like, hey, you need
Mhm.
to like teach them. I was so scared. But the teacher's like, oh, I love him. I'm like,
Nothing's
well,
going
that's
on.
great.
But then often what happens is that everything goes well at school, but you're doubling down at home because they're keeping it all together at school. But
Yes.
when they get home, then it's explodes and it's
Yes.
just worse. So the better, and then when you address that with the teacher just don't see it. They're
Yep.
like, what? But there's no problem. So the problem must be at home if your child
Hmm.
is exploding at home. And so the parents take it on themselves, but it's not more your problem. It's not the parents not going the good job. They're exploding at home because they feel safe
Right.
and they feel like, here, if I explode, people are still going to love me. At school, I'm not sure. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to do it.
Which feels like a compliment, right? Because they feel safe to do that. But at the same time, it's like, why?
Yes.
This
It's a
is really
compliment, but
hard.
it's a really weird compliment for sure.
Right? And I remember, like, so we recently had my middle son diagnosed with sensory processing disorder as well as anxiety. And part of the process was actually getting the teacher to submit a questionnaire
Hmm.
also. And
Hmm.
so there was my questionnaire and then her answers. And the psychologist was like, so the teacher doesn't notice anything. And I was like, okay, well, that makes me look a little crazy, right? But it definitely happens here. Like, I'm glad
Hmm.
it's not happening at school, but that doesn't
Hmm.
make it any less true that there's
No.
something that he's struggling with
Yeah.
to maintain his sense of like groundedness and being able to be ready to listen. Glad he's using all his energy at school, but it doesn't make home life any easier. So, what makes the whole parenting experience different for couples raising emotionally intense kids or kids with special needs?
I would say the biggest difference is it's like everything. It's just going to be amplified. For example, one of the parent will be more involved with the kids. So often you have one parent that will be more often like it's the parent that the school is going to call all the time, the parents who's going to the teachers meeting and things like that. It's very rare that it's completely equal. So one parent will be more involved. When you have a child with any kind of special needs, you have more to do as a parent. So you might have appointments, you have more to deal with just to deal with the intensity of the child. And then you're going to probably want to research information to understand what's going on with the child. And so the parents who's taking on more will take on way more than the other parent. You have like a biggest gap here. And then when you have a lot that you take on, it's hard to transfer the entire information to the other parents so that that parent is really up to speed. And it's not anybody's fault. Often one will work out of the house less than the other, especially when you have a child with special needs. At some point, one parent might have to lower the workload because it's just not doable. And most employers are not going to let you miss work all the time to go to appointments and things like that. So it really depends the level of needs of the child. Of course, more needs, the more appointment, the more follow-up, the less chances that both parents can work full-time. But from my experience, it's rare that both parents will lower their workload. It's one of the two parents, most of the time the one that makes less. So it's most of the time in heterosexual couples, it's going to be the mom, but not always. Like I've seen the opposite, but most of the time that's what happens. I've seen maybe once or twice that the parents are coming an alternate to like 1 week it's one parent and the other week it's going to be the other parent. That's very rare for a couple that are together. If they're separated, that will happen. But when they're together, most of the time it's one parent. So the workload is very, very much on one parent more. And that parent will take on a lot. And often they will even get diagnosis or the bad news or information, and then they need to transfer that to the other parent, which is hard. Like you're the one who gives bad news. So, and it's not necessarily bad news, it's just what's happening at school so that the teacher are going to complain about something and like you need to get that back to your partner at home. And so you're the person who's bringing that. So it's very difficult. And sometimes both parents are not seeing the same thing also because the child is not reacting with both parents the same way. And so the parents who's getting more of the tantrum will really have the hardest part of the job, especially if the other parents just don't get it because they don't have that as a reaction, which again will probably be the parents who's less at home because the child feels most comfortable with the parents they are the most with, which is just normal. And then also if you have to adapt, because as we were saying, it's not the same way to parent. We need to change the way we parent those kids. Like when a child is a complete meltdown, don't try to give them a consequences so that they get out of it. It's just going to make things worse. It's not working, but it's the common parenting knowledge. Like you're not going to get your iPad next time because you did a meltdown because I took your iPad. If you say that, you're just going to make things worse. But that's what we're told to do, you know? And so if you decide to change the way you're parenting to help that child, and the other parent is not as much on board for many reasons because they're not as involved, they don't know the same, they have different parenting values, or they have outside influence that will lead them another way, then it becomes really hard because you're trying to change things to make it better, but the other parent is not changing. And there's nobody who's trying to do anything wrong here. It's just hard to be on the same page. Anyway, as parents, that can happen anytime. So again, it's just amplified when you have a child that you really need to change the way you're parenting them so that it's working. That will make things more complicated.
I have been that parent, right? And I wouldn't say that it kind of just fell on me. I think it was more, I'm very interested in helping him. And so I know a lot of couples where the mom does tend to take on a lot more because we have been conditioned, we have been taught to care a lot more for our relationships. And as a parent, as a mom specifically, we do have a lot of expectations put on us. But we also put it on ourselves oftentimes.
Yes.
And so, for my experience, when I first realized that, oh, there's probably something I need to get checked on for our middle son and even our oldest, he has ADHD and dyslexia. Our middle one
Mhm.
has sensory processing disorder. And when I realized that, oh, the problems that we're facing right now aren't the same as our friends with their kids seem easier. I like threw everything into like, okay, who do I need to talk to? What kind of testing do I need to do so that I fully understand what's happening so that I can help them develop the areas that they're struggling with that are
Mhm.
like creating these situations that look like meltdowns or, low frustration tolerance and so on and so forth. And for our middle child, we ended up taking him to occupational therapy. And I'm not going to lie, I broke down several times because what they suggested that we do was so overwhelming.
Mhm.
And I found myself taking it all in as my own personal responsibility.
Mhm.
And I started to snap a lot with my husband because I grew resentful. But what
Mhm.
I didn't notice until later was that I never even talked about it with him about,
Yeah.
hey, I can't do this myself. Like,
Mhm.
what part are you willing to take in? Like, I know you have a more rigid work schedule because you work for someone, whereas I work for myself.
Mhm.
But like, I can't do this by myself anymore. I am stressing out. I'm being reactive now. I'm not who I want to be for our family.
Mhm.
And he was like, oh, yeah, I didn't even realize that it was impacting you this much. Okay, teach me how to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And this is my schedule. So, like, okay, I'll do this part, I'll do the morning stuff. And
Mhm.
then if you could just do the stuff when he gets home, because in the beginning it was like very, very, very overwhelming. It was like every few hours we had to do something for him, along with reflexes and so on and so forth. But that was such a weight off my shoulders that I didn't realize I put on myself.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
how often are you seeing that in the couples that you're supporting?
I would say it's almost always like that.
Yeah, right? It's
Yes.
not even like we're doing it on purpose,
No,
but
no, it's
there's
just
this
we're
assumption
there.
that we
And
have to do it
yeah,
ourselves,
and
like, all the way.
often it's not just that. All the information that we are receiving, it's a lot.
Mhm.
Most of the time you don't get it 100%. Like it's not integrated. You're just learning that stuff. So it's a lot of information that you don't really fully understand. Transferring that to someone else is very hard. It's very complicated. And so the idea sometimes of having to transfer that information over is
Totally.
too much. So you decide, often unconsciously, to just do it yourself because
Yes,
it feels easier to just do it than to transfer
yes.
the information. And I would say it's true right now, but on the long run, not.
It's not sustainable.
No,
Like, just
exactly.
take my example, right? Like,
Hmm.
I completely turned into someone I hated while it was originally intended to be supportive, right?
Yeah.
To support my child, to support our family, because it does do a lot to the
Hmm.
general feeling in the home
Yeah.
when one person is almost like their needs are like dominating the
Yeah.
parent's
Definitely.
capacity, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, they're not doing it on purpose, they need support.
No.
But I have two other kids. And then, when I feel like I'm doing this to help and I'm helping my husband by taking it all on myself, I'm really causing more harm because not only is it our son that needs help, it's also me. And
Yes.
then we're just drowning as a family,
Yes.
right? And so if you're out there and you're like, wow, that is totally me right now. I am like this person does everything. I urge you to stop,
Yes.
like stop playing the role of like savior and martyr and allow your husband, your partner to help you, even if it's a little bit, right? And I know it looks like extra work to fill them in on what
Hmm.
it takes, but it's the one proactive thing that you need to put extra energy into to offload the long term
Yeah.
effort that you need to put into. And it
Definitely.
feels so good when you have a partner in it, knowing that, oh, I don't have to do that.
Mhm.
I have someone that's along the ride with me that is also supporting my child. I don't have to be the default parent when it comes to this.
Mhm.
And I can't say how much that did for our marriage, for us to feel like we're truly doing it together and I not carry that resentment that I didn't know I was carrying.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets there little by little, so you don't really
Mhm.
realize that it's there.
Yeah.
And also, I want to go back to one thing you said about like you had a lot of things to do when you went to the OD. And
Mhm.
that's often the case. And one of the things that we need to remember is that we can tell that to the professionals that we're working with. Like, it's too
Yes.
much for me right now. What's the most important thing to do?
Yeah, what's the bare minimum?
Yes, no, but it's true. And like, it's not going to be better if you're completely overwhelmed and
Right.
exhausted. Even if you do exactly what the OT has told you to do, if you're completely exhausted, it's going to work against your family anyway. So it's okay to go back and say, you know what, right now in my reality, it's too much. What is the most important thing that I should be doing?
Yeah.
Especially if there's more than one appointment. If you're seeing two different professionals, they don't know. They're going to give you a workload, and then you have things coming from school, and then you have your own work, and it gets a lot at the same time.
Mhm.
And yes, sharing the load is one way to do it, but even when you share the load, sometimes it's just too much. And I honestly, I was working in the readaptation center. We were working often with the same child with 4 or 5 different professionals. And
Ooh.
they don't realize that everybody's giving exercise or activities to the parents. It's just not realistic. And so when I was there as a social worker, one of my job was to talk with the parents and see if that was realistic and what was the most important for them right now or for their child right now, and go back to the professional so that they can express that it's too much and that the professional can help them narrow down to the most important things to do. So it's something that you can do. It's not because a professional of any kind tell you to do some things that you have to do it without asking questions.
Yeah. Oh, I love that because you really do need to be an advocate
Yeah.
for your child and for yourself. And if you are working with multiple professionals, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. I was only working with one, right? And I feel like if we are going to do something to support the development of our children so that they can be able to cope with what's going on within them and understand so that they can be more resilient and be able to handle life's challenges. What's most important is it doesn't really matter how much of what you're doing. Anything that you're doing consistently is going to improve the situation.
Yeah.
Maybe it's going to take a little bit longer, but you're still making progress.
Hmm.
And if you had to choose between following routine A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way to Z that the professionals are giving to you, the priority is actually you being calm about it.
Yep.
I can't
Yep.
tell you how many times OT was like, okay, I love that you're doing these things, but like if you
Losing it.
seem worked up, it's not gonna work because he's gonna pick up on that. I'm like, oh my God, you're completely right.
Yes.
You
Yes.
are so right.
Mhm.
I was like, okay, well, I have to do these things because this is what they told me to do, and this is gonna help you. But meanwhile, I'm like,
Yeah. It's too
just
much.
yeah.
Yeah. And again, if it's too much because they're giving things to do, and it's the same for homework, for example, like you have a list
Mhm.
of things to do, and then it looks great. And then you go back home and you try and you're like, wait, what was it again?
Yes.
I felt it was clear, but it's not clear anymore. And it's okay to go back and ask. Like,
Yeah.
even if you skip a week, nothing's very bad is going to happen unless what we're told is like life threatening, which is not often the case. It does happen. For most kids, it's not the case. Like 1 week without any exercise of OT is not life threatening.
Right.
So it's okay if you wait a week and ask back because you were not sure and you feel like you're doing it wrong, and that it's okay. Like you can go back and ask again and ask them to show you again. You're not a bad parent for not picking up on stuff that They studied for years at
Yes.
university and then they practice this for years. So it's okay. It looks very easy when they do it.
But not only that, normal life is
Yeah,
already limiting our time and energy. And then we add
totally.
on extra stuff to support our child who needs more of our help and support.
Hmm.
Like, let's not downplay that, right? Because
Hmm.
if you're already struggling to find time to hang out with your partner and you're like, wait a minute, now I have to do all these things while I have all this other stuff going on, that's a lot in itself. So give
Yeah.
yourself grace and know that you're still making a difference, even just becoming more aware, even just
Hmm.
doing one thing new a week,
Yeah.
right?
And just regulating yourself and staying
Yeah,
calm, even if you just do that 1 week and stay calm more often than what you used to, you're making a difference, even if you do nothing else.
absolutely. And not to mention the things that we learn to support them with, we're also dealing with our own emotions about the diagnosis or
Yeah.
the challenges that they're experiencing, right? So, can you touch on what that's like, the reality of being a parent to a special needs kid or an emotionally intense kid?
Hmm. Yeah. And it's a different experience if you have a diagnosis and not. Even if you don't necessarily have a diagnosis, if you're called by the school, for example, every 2 days or many times a day, and at home you're worried that something is really wrong, it's a very stressful situation. So you're dealing with a lot more stress and anxiety, and often our brain will go very fast to they're never going to be a functioning adult. And so we spiral down very fast. So it's very intense on that side, no matter if we have a diagnosis or not. And then when you have a diagnosis, or if for some reason at some point you realize that your child is not developing at the same speed as others and that they are having a different life experience as others and that it's ongoing and it will probably stay like that, even if it's going to change somewhat in their life, there's a grief that will come. It's a grieving process, exactly like when you're losing someone, but the grieving process is different because it's not like you're losing something and you have, or someone, and you need to adapt to that. You're losing small things on an ongoing basis. So every day, every week, every few months, you're going to realize that, okay, this thing, they're not doing it the same way. Oh, this, they won't be able to do it that way. Oh, this thing is going to be different. And so it's ongoing little things that you're grieving. And so the process is always there in the back of your mind. And some days you might forget about it, the same as when you lose someone. Some days you kind of forget and you feel good and everything is well. And then other days you're going to fall down because something else is going and going to crash in your face. And often for different people, it's going to be different, but often every milestone related to school will be difficult. So when you see people that their child is going to middle school or they're going to high school or they're having graduation and things like that, and your child has difficulty in school and is not going through that process at the speed that other kids are going through, it can be very challenging to see all, and people are posting pictures online of kids graduating and things like that. So it can be difficult to see those things, and the grieving process will basically stay there all the
Yeah,
time, and people don't realize it's grieving.
totally. And it's a complicated process because you can grieve and wish things were different while also loving the
Sure,
individual that you have in front of you. Like, even
sure.
though they have all these differences, you can still love them and feel, some type of way about they're not going to have the life that I saw for them, or
Hmm.
they're going to have a harder time with relationships with friends. Maybe they are not going to get married, or maybe they're not going to have kids, or whatever it is.
Hmm.
We all have these like unsaid hopes and dreams for our kids as soon as we get pregnant. Like, let's
Hmm.
be honest, right? And that's a lot to deal with. And that's probably going to come through when you go on this journey of learning to support your child. So if you feel like, gosh, why do I get so overwhelmed when I'm just trying to help my kid? There's a lot more
Yeah.
to it than just doing the thing, right? It's not just following a recipe to make a meal. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah, it's a lot. And often parents will feel guilty to feel that grief, as you're saying,
Yeah.
because it's like we're questioning the love for our children when we grieve. But we're not, like, it's not related at all. And it doesn't question how much you're loving in your children. And just the fact that you're working extra hard to help them just show how much you love them and how much you're there for them, but you're grieving. And as again, every parents go through that kind of grief of, my kid is not exactly how I was imagining, and parenting is not exactly what I was imagining. That's a common parent experience. And it's just again amplified when you have a child with special needs, because
Mhm.
things are way more different than what you had imagined they would be. So that's
Yeah.
the difference. And again, in a couple, it's often that process will go very differently and not at the same speed and a different direction, because there's many little steps in grief. It's not really steps because it often goes in circle, but there are many states that you can be when you grieve. And most often than not, you're not at the same one as your partner. So that makes things hard. So you can be sad and your partner may be like mad at what's happening, or
Yeah.
someone can be in denial and the other one is super invested, so that it's different stages of the process, and you are not at the same place, and it can be very, very different, especially I would say when one is in denial and just taking distance to protect themselves in the process of grieving, and the other one is very invested, so that we see that often. It's very
Mhm.
hard because the person who's really invested has the feeling that the other one doesn't care. And in fact, most of the time, it's not that at all. It's really that they're hurting a lot. And that's a way of protecting themselves. So it's not they
Totally.
don't care, they are just dealing with it in another way.
Right. And we all have different coping mechanisms. Some people are ready to spearhead the next thing and go, 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 go.
Hmm.
And other people get really overwhelmed and they shut down, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why communicating is such a big thing for any marriage, but especially marriage where you have extra challenges that you're dealing with as a parent, and being able to be that safe space for each other to share what's truly going on so that you know what's happening with yourself, with your partner, and to keep that in mind when moving forward, right? So giving
Hmm.
them the benefit of the doubt, not assuming anything, and letting them express how this is being experienced through them. I can't emphasize that enough because we are different. And just as much as our kids are individuals, we also have to honor that our partners are individuals and we're individuals as well. And approaching it with truly compassion and partnership and grace and acceptance, and find a way to move forward and know that what you want to do doesn't necessarily have to be met with the same level of effort, because we do what we have the capacity for,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes we're the ones with the higher capacity, but that doesn't mean not to bring your partner in
Yeah.
whenever they are able to participate in it, right? Like, don't give up, because you advocating for yourself, for your child, for your home is the best way for your home to actually feel good, right? So when you're practicing self care by saying, hey, I can't do this all myself, that's going to pay off in dividends
Yeah.
in your home life.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
So we can talk about this forever because we can go in so many different directions, but I want to respect your time and the time of our listeners.
Sure.
Can you share with us what resources you have for parents who are struggling with this? Parents who have emotionally intense kids or with special needs, and they're just like, I don't even know what to do. I just know that this isn't normal and I need help. I don't even know where to look or what to try.
So I have a podcast also, which is called Parenting the Intensity. So I would start there. There's lots of information that are definitely directly related. I also have a free course called Parenting an Emotionally Intense Kids More Easily. Pretty self-explanatory. So parents can also get that. It's the first ways to reframe how we support kids that are emotionally intense. Also, we're talking a lot about self care. So, I also have a self care guide for parents that is free, which is realistic self care for busy parents, because often we don't have time to do it. We feel like we just cannot. So it's really a way to start with a few seconds a day to do self-care that really fits the needs of each person. So I would
Amazing.
say that's the first steps, and anything is easily findable on my website.
Amazing. So, what's the best way for people to connect with you? Where do you like to hang out most?
I'm generally on Instagram, Facebook also, but mostly on Instagram. My Instagram is in French. It's the same as my business name, but in French, but it's maman.famille. So famille is family in French, and mama is exactly the same as moments, which is family moments is the name of my business in English. Otherwise, my website and the podcasts are the best way to find me.
Amazing. And I'll put the links in the show notes. So go check her out if you want to learn more about what you can do to improve how home life feels, how you feel as a parent, because that's like the most important, right? While also supporting your child. Okay. Before I let you go, I love to ask my guests a question so the listeners can get to know you better.
Mhm.
What's something you said you would never, ever, ever, ever do as a mom, but that you totally do now?
Oh my. Probably I would say a lot more TV than I thought I would ever let my kids look at. Yeah,
Definitely.
a lot more, especially that my kids are all neurodivergent, and I learned that TV is a way to calm neurodivergent minds. And so I realized how much TV is calming for some of my kids and can be very helpful to help them cope. So, for example, my youngest is doing 3 half days of preschool right now, and it's a lot for her. She's not napping anymore, but she really needs the rest. So she kind of needs an hour and a half of TV when she comes back because she cannot do anything else. And it's
Mhm.
something I would never thought of doing. Like letting a 4-year-old looking at an hour and a half of TV, treat it like I would have never thought I would do that. But I realized that it's working for her. And after that,
Yeah.
she's looking like she's getting up and she's leaving the TV there and she's going and asking to do something else when she's rested. So it's like she's not going to stay in front of the TV forever. She just needs that time to settle.
Sure.
So she's lying on the sofa with her blanket and she's just resting her mind and often looking at baby stuff, things that are way easier for her brain and that she
Yeah.
knows well. So it really is calming. And my older one looks at TV to fall asleep because it sees the only way to fall asleep, and it really,
Mm.
really helps. So it's all things I would have never thought I would do, honestly. Before COVID, we were at like one movie a week as a family. That was the
Mhm.
only screen time my kids were getting.
Yeah.
So we came really far from that right now. But it's like a lot of other things, we adapt to what works.
That's right. And I feel like everybody should approach life in general with that. Like, do whatever works for you.
Hmm.
And who cares about what other people say? As long as you're
Yeah.
not hurting anyone, like it doesn't really matter.
No, it's but it's easy to say. It's very harder to do.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Well, thank you so much for being here. I loved having you on here as a guest. Again, if you connected with anything that we shared on this episode, please go check her out. And I will catch you all back here. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. I would so appreciate that. And if you love what I share here, then you're going to love and want to join my free private Facebook community that's also called Marriage and Motherhood. I hope to see and connect with you in there. Otherwise, I'll catch you back here for the next episode. Bye!